Welcome, everybody. We are doing a wrap-up of our project with botanical belonging called Stable M. Stable M was a botanical survey of a neighbor's 73-acre property, and we used iNaturalist to survey this property, and we wanted to share with everyone who participated and others who were interested what we found while we were down there on our visits throughout the season. So I'm Patty Ragsdale, and I led our tours along with Anna Funk, who's the president of our board. Our tours were in several areas of this 73-acre property that is just down the street from Happy Apples Farm, where Botanical Belonging is located. The 73 acres is a lot of property. It's beautiful. There are lots of different things to see there. And we tried to kind of focus on areas that would give us the most things to see in the different seasons that we visited. Stable M has been under the same ownership for over 40 years. The woman who owns this property also has 6 horses. The trails that are mowed through the woodlands and the pasture were initially created for riding horses, and it's made it a wonderful place just to explore, for everyone to be able to explore throughout the season. Much of the property is wooded, but the most interesting thing is that it hasn't been really, nothing's really been done to this property besides mowing these trails and letting the horses graze the pastures. So not a lot of, improvements, not a lot of damage to the trails, like no heavy horseback riding, no heavy machinery on the trails except to keep them mowed. Really very beautiful, kind of untouched space. So the property has 3 really distinct habitats that exist there. We did a rough survey with Caleb Morse from the KU R.L. McGregor Herbarium. And he kind of told us about the 3 distinct areas that were there. And the first area that most of us interacted with was the degraded prairie, because to access the other 2 areas, you had to walk across that. So the prairie is basically pasture for the horses, but there are some really interesting species that still live there, along with invasive species like Sericea lespedeza. But under your feet, as you're walking, you'll see little Antenaria neglecta. There's Liatris aspera and Vernonia baldwinii, which you see in the background of this photo. A second one of the habitats is the floodplain forest. There's a 10-acre lake, which is really big on this property, that was built in the 1960s. And below the dam and along the stream that's below the dam, there is this really, really old growth floodplain forest. It is an amazing place to be in the spring, but it also has some really interesting things happening in there in the summer, and a little bit in the fall. We did go down there some in the fall because we got to see some of the things that we saw in the spring in fruit in the fall. The most interesting thing in that part of the forest is the huge, huge grove of pawpaws. It is the biggest pawpaw grove I've ever been in my life. It was the first place I'd ever seen people mowing through pawpaws, I'm very familiar with them now because I've maintained the trails down there all summer. So the third habitat is different in a lot of ways than that floodplain forest, but it's also a treed area. It historically was probably more open based on what we see in the understory there. but it has some really huge trees, including post oaks and chinkapin oaks, and on the sandstone portions, it has black oak, and a lot of hickory, different kinds of hickory in both areas, both of the different wooded areas there. It also has a really unique place that it contains some prairie species on kind of a glade habitat. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about some of the results of our survey. So why did we use iNaturalist? Well, iNaturalist is a free app that anybody can use, really. Anybody can download it and use it. So you upload your photos and you can browse through some suggestions that they give you, and kind of start to investigate based on those suggestions what it is you're seeing. So it really gives us, as users, a little hint as to what we're seeing without really taking over that work of identifying everything. Gives us some opportunity to go and do some research ourselves to confirm, and then you submit your observations, and there are expert identifiers in this who've collaborated with iNaturalist to help kind of make sure that these observations are placed in the right spots, like they're correct. And that will flag your observation as research grade. And scientists can actually use that kind of observation in their research projects. So these observations are shared with the landowner, Julie, who's my friend. She is really interested in all the things that we found. She herself doesn't use a smartphone, so she doesn't have access to it that way, but we can share these with her through her computer, because she does get on that, and she's finding it very fascinating to learn about all the species that she has on her property. So ecologists will definitely use this information. It's quite helpful to all the scientists and all the botanists out there who are interested in where these plants are occurring. So our results now are all uploaded to the iNaturalist project on iNaturalist, or the Stable M project on iNaturalist. And here is kind of a wrap up of what we found. We made 196 observations while we were at the Stable M location. So this project is based on a location. It has defined boundaries, and anything that is photographed and uploaded to iNaturalist within those boundaries appears in our Stable M project. So, I should tell you, I didn't mention this, but the word Stable M is the name that Julie, my neighbor, has given to her 73-acre property. It's a stable for those 6 horses, and M for Murphy. So you might know, like, there's rocking R's and things like that people call these ranches. So she just calls this place Stable M. And so when we began this project, we went ahead and named it after the place. So the boundaries of Stable M are really what defines all of these observations. So anything that I take a picture of that is a plant or an animal or of some kind, insect, animal, fungus, those kinds of things are going to appear, as long as it's uploaded to iNaturalist, in these results. So as I said, we did 196 observations. So 196 images were uploaded, or single observations, because we can have more than one image per observation. And then that, when that accounts for 136 species that we identified. Some of them are animals. Most of them are plants. we have 48 identifiers, which actually refers to other people who are out there confirming our observations. There were 7 people that participated in uploading observations to our survey. And this is a map. Let me go back. Yeah, this is a map of the where we saw things. So the green ones are all plants. The bird is the blue one, and I think that was a vulture that we saw. She actually, you might know, is a really interesting kind of tidbit about the landowner. She actually feeds the uh, vultures that come and sit on the power line. That there's a big easement that goes through the middle of the property. So she's a really interesting person who's been caring for this place by herself for many, many years now, and has done a beautiful job. But you can see in this map that there are, we actually traveled all around and looked at a lot of different places on this property. And the gray area here is where the lake is. There's actually 2 lakes. There's a little kind of what do you call that? A silt pond that comes in on the side. And the kind of the south or bottom right corner here is more of that upland woodland, the woodland that is the oak hickory woodland. And then on the more towards the left part of this property, that's where the floodplain forest is. But we did see a lot of things you can see there in the pasture area that's kind of between those 2 corners. So let's go see. So there's a few insects there. One included a tick. So you'll see that in some of our observations. But here's an example of some of the things that we saw. And when we go to the iNaturalist project and take a look around, we'll be able to see that there are a lot more than just these that we're looking at here that were observed, but these are some beautiful images of the, not all from us, these are just some of the species that we saw. These are, I checked this out to see if these were actually all our images, and they aren't actually, but we did see, get some very, very beautiful images, and we can take a look through those here in a minute. So some of the highlights were Parlin's pussy toes. And this might not seem like a big deal to you or to most people, because pussy toes, the regular pussy toes, which is field pussy toes, Antenaria neglecta, is pretty common. Parlin's pussy toes, on the other hand, is not very common here. We don't see it often. And in that really interesting kind of glade area that I mentioned in the oak hickory woodland, we did find the population of Parlin's pussy toes that we ran across the year before, when we had the kind of rough survey done by the herbarium. So Parlin's pussy toes has some really interesting, has one really interesting identifier. As a really wide leaf. I'll show you some pictures from the actual observation in iNaturalist that kind of show the identifier, which is the bottom of the leaf, the basal leaf, and it's really wide and it has 3 veins on it. So Parlin's pussy toes was a big deal for me. We also, there's me looking down at this gigantic Jack in the Pulpit. Jack in the Pulpit in this woodland actually was in 2 color forms. One is that kind of purple color form, and then I'm trying to move this around so we can see the other one. The other one is the yellow, has yellow stripes on the spathe, and this one has the purple stripes. But these were in both of the wooded areas, the floodplain forest and the oak hickory woodland. So beautiful species to be able to see, and we saw it several times, or at least on 2 of the visits to this woodland. Oops, I can't get it to go forward. I don't know why. Ah, there. This one, though, which is a cousin of the Jack in the Pulpit, this is green dragon. So they're in the same genus, these two. So you can see Erycema, triphyllum. So it has 3 leaves. You can see 3 leaflets. And then Dracontium. I said Dracontium. Erycema, green dragon. This one is rarer than Jack in the Pulpit. Not as pretty, but has a very, very interesting look to it. You can see it's one big kind of leaf that divides into 2 sides, and the 2 sides kind of wrap around, so it looks kind of like 2 leaves. But it isn't. It's just one big leaf. So that one was also seen, and the only place I've really seen that one is in the floodplain forest. Spider milkweed or green antelope horn is a pretty common one to see, but it's really beautiful. I love it. It grows in my pasture, grows in mostly in those open spaces. Beautiful milkweed that is an early bloomer compared with most of the other milkweeds. Slender lady's tresses. This was one of the really interesting one. This one and what is it? This one was in that glade area also where we found the Parlin's pussy toes. Not something you would typically find in a woodland, but I found slender lady's tresses in 2 places on Julie's property in woodlands. Again, another indication that those areas were probably more open than they are now. We were seeing quite a few things in that glade area that were indicative of that having been an open space in the past. But we can find, some of these prairie species in glade areas, even if they are in woodlands because they're less wooded. But lady's tresses and catclaw sensitive briar would be more likely to be seen in the pasture, and this catclaw sensitive briar was actually in the pasture also. So let's explore now, if I can get this to switch, let's explore the actual iNaturalist project and then look at the distribution of some of these species. So I'm going to go to the actual project right here. And hopefully you can still see my screen. So this is the live project. And you can see here, let's see. I'm going to move my chat window off to the side so I can see. Here are our observations, and I have it in a list view, but we can also look in the grid view. And here's that map that we saw before. So this is in iNaturalist, we can explore a lot of things by just switching that view. Oh, sorry. Zooming in and out. This is a really fun view for me because these are actually our images, whereas if I look at the species, these aren't necessarily our images. So I really love seeing the images we took of the actual species by looking at it in this view. This was one where I was just there on a walk myself. This little indication at the top means this is research grade. I found a fern that I wasn't aware was growing, down in this kind of a draw. So I was down walking in a draw and found this, and I thought, good grief, that's a little bit different. But it is identified by these spores, or these, I don't know what you even call them, a sporangia that's on the underside of the leaf. Very beautiful. Looks a lot like every other fern to me. One really interesting thing that I saw while I was walking in these woodlands, and a lot of times for me, I really just like finding new things that I haven't seen in these woodlands before. So when I go, a lot of times I'll take pictures of things that aren't as interesting maybe to other people. They're not as showy, but they really are a species that I'm not used to seeing in these woodlands. And one of those would have been this one, the late figwort. I had never come across this in a woodland around here, although I do know that they're supposed to be here. But this one was quite interesting to me. It's a huge plant, and it's a really important late blooming species for some of our native really small wasps. That's not something that a lot of people are trying to support, but wasps are important pollinators. They do a lot of good work in the environment around us. But this is a really cool plant, this late figwort. So that was a cool one to find. Some of our pictures are absolutely beautiful. Others are maybe not. And you can see here how many of the how many observations are part of this. Like in this one, I took 2 pictures. It's right in here. And if I click on this, you'll be able to see, I guess I took three pictures of this plant. So now let me see if I can get back. Yeah. And then this one, it was another one that I hadn't ever seen anywhere, actually. So this is a euphorbia, and doesn't say it's in there. Very beautiful plant that's in the poinsettia family. I see that's 2 identifiers. 2 people have identified that. And this one we photographed quite a few times because it was beautiful throughout the season. We had a whole lot of different observations of that. So you'll see those observations kind of repeated through here. So you can see I took some pictures of this Canada clearweed, and then I think I took it again down here. So, or Anna did. Anna took a picture of it down here. So those are separate, but they're appearing at the top as just one species that we identified in 2 separate observations. So a lot of beautiful things were in here, and this one right here is one that I love seeing in the woodlands. It's actually a gigantic plant that is just really very beautiful, and even its seed heads are beautiful. Mullen foxglove, or Dasostoma macrophylla. I think it's an annual, but it gets gigantic. And this one is a favorite of mine. I really love this. This is tall thimbleweed. Not the best pictures of it, but this right now in the landscape outside, this plant looks like cotton, like the cotton you use like harvest for fiber. Really fuzzy. We play with kids or have kids play with it, because once you pull the seeds off, it leaves a really fuzzy tip on it that feels very soft, like a Q-tip. So using little things like that and being able to identify these plants in the wild landscape like this one, it's really useful for interpreting for children and attaching people to the native plants in our landscape. And this was one of my absolute favorite plants to find, and find it in fruit during our time there, because when we saw it several different times, but bladdernut is a very cool species to be finding in our woodlands here because of these inflated seed pods. And so when we go through there, even in the winter, when we go down these trails, you'll see these, they get kind of a really pretty light, kind of a camel color, very beautiful, hanging throughout the woodlands. So all the leaves will be gone, but you'll have these things kind of like lanterns hanging around in the woodland because they are a clonal species that spreads underground. So you'll just see these big patches of these little lanterns hanging around. Very beautiful, and fun that we got to share that with folks in this woodland. Let's see if I can find another one. Here's another one of the bladdernut, and you can see from its Latin name, the Staphylia trifolia, that it has 3 leaves. So that's an identifier for that one. Leaves of 3 aren't always bad, as in this case, it's a really cool thing. We saw the Viburnum prunifolium. This is smooth black haw. We saw that several times, and I took observations of this later in the season where the leaves are red and the fruits are black. But I think we even had some observations in the spring. I think I'm going backwards through these observations. We saw some in the spring that were in flower. So going back many, many times in the season gave us a lot of perspective on what these plants looked like throughout the season. So this is one of the beautiful purple milkweeds that grows in Julie's Stable M woodlands, in all of them. So this is a woodland milkweed. It's usually not the most robust milkweed that you'll ever see, but it's got a very striking color, very beautiful, and one of the very few shade-loving milkweeds around. So after a lot of people are looking to buy that, in nurseries because of its shade tolerance. So we took simple things like poison ivy, and the Carolina horse nettle, and even invasive species like musk thistle. Whenever we saw anything, we would document it using this program. I'm going to see if I can find. There's a cat claw sensitive briar. Here's a really good picture of the purple milkweed and how really intense the color is on this plant. I find the purple milkweed, the Asclepias purpurascens, difficult to identify when it's not in fruit, because it has a very similar look, fruit or flower, to the common milkweed. Like I said, it's a much less robust plant, so usually not as big. The inflorescence, the flower, the purple flower, actually doesn't nod like the common milkweed, and the color, of course, is way different. The fruit is a very, very distinctive, or very different from the common milkweed fruit. It's smooth, just kind of fuzzy, but doesn't have any of those little projections that you'd see on the common milkweed. But otherwise, it's very similar. It has a petiole on the leaf. The leaf is very similar to common milkweed. So a little bit difficult to identify based on just the form of the plant, but not if you're not going to find common milkweed growing maybe as deep in the woodlands as you would the purple milkweed. We saw ferns like the rattlesnake fern early in the season. It was still there. There's another green dragon. Lopseed was a really interesting one, but I've seen that one even here on my place. We saw things that I'd never even heard of in this. Let me see if I can find this thing. I saw a lopseed just a second ago, which is here it is. Lopseed is kind of an interesting plant. Obviously, it's called lopseed because of the way that its seeds kind of flop over like that. But otherwise pretty nondescript. It's just that those seeds, the way that these fruits lay down like that on the stem. So anyway, a lot of interesting things were found, things that I'm not used to seeing, because I don't have a woodland in this really wonderful condition, like Julie's down the street. So we were really grateful that she allowed us to explore throughout the season, and she is benefiting too from our exploration by getting this survey of a lot of species throughout the year. Here's our one, there's our tick, which is kind of cool. We actually saw a lot of ticks, which was to be expected in a woodland throughout the season. So this rattlesnake fern is really easy to identify, but we actually had a couple of really good observations that showed it with, later in the season with this really wonderful example of what its fruiting structures look like. Really kind of a neat, it's a really big fern, really compared, not really big, but bigger than most of the ferns that we see in our woodlands around here. Let's see if I can find another one that really stood out for me in these. So I'll tell you, this structure right here is one that I learned from this woodland. I had never seen anything like this. It almost looks whorled, and very striking foliage for this plant. But this is Silene stellata, and it's called starry campion. It has white flowers, which are very beautiful. And if you looked at the species, the picture that iNaturalist has of the starry campion species, it's not really going to show you this leaf structure. So even though I knew what the starry campion flower looked like, I had never identified it just by foliage until I started exploring these woods. So that's a really cool thing. And here's another kind of gallium. Galliums are those bed straws, or sticky weeds is what some people call them. They stick to you, but the ones that are natives are very, very pretty. I think pretty delicate. They do kind of stick to you, but not as bad as the one that is a weed in our gardens. So these are pretty plants, and they grow in these woodlands, in nicer woodlands, I think. Yeah. Let's see if we can find some more. Isn't this one a cool looking plant? And Anna found this one, and I thought, man, that is not the kind of thing that you would often see, just the structure of those leaves, really beautiful foliage. So we saw a lot of different things that I really, even though I've been walking in these woodlands for a long time, I wasn't familiar with. And yeah, this is one up in that. So the glade area had things that I was not used to seeing in either woodlands or prairies. So finding little things like these little tiny corn salads, even though they're pretty common, I'm just not used to seeing those except in places like that. And this is the picture I was looking for to show the identifier for that Parlin's pussy toes. That strong veination on a wider leaf is the identifier for Parlin's pussy toes. And that, if you looked on Bonap, which I was going to show you, here's the upper side of the leaf. And you can see that you can even kind of see those three veins on the upper side of the leaf. And that's really quite an unusual thing for those pussy toes. Really wonderful. Doesn't look really great there, but this was a early picture before it really started getting going. But that silvery look is kind of an identifier for pussy toes. whether it's Parlin's pussy toes or the field pussy toes that we typically see. I'd like to show you what the range looks like on Bonap for that particular species. But I'm going to look through here pretty quick just to kind of see if there are any others that we can. Yeah, and there's field pussy toes. You can see there's a different, those 3 veins aren't there on the top of this field pussy toes. I'm getting to the spring observations now. Of course, lots of pawpaws, a lot of pawpaws, May apples, trout lilies, Dutchman's breeches, everything that you'd really want to see. There's another fawn lily, the different one. And here's the, I don't know if it was rusty black or smooth black that we were seeing, but this is in flower. Yeah, we had a lot of good cutleaf toothwort. A lot of beautiful spring ephemerals were there for us in the spring in that floodplain forest in particular. This wild larkspur is another one that was in that glade area that was quite different, that I wasn't used to seeing around it, at least not in a woodland, kind of like that slender lady's tresses, not something I'm used to seeing in woodlands. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is look up that Parlin's pussy toes so that you can kind of see why it might be a kind of a special observation for this place. So if you're not familiar with bonap.org, it's BONAP, the Biota of North America program. It's a mapping program for ranges of species. And this is one of my favorite ways to kind of check suggestions that iNaturalist gives us. And this was something that we went through as part of this survey with the participants to help learn to evaluate some of the suggestions that iNaturalist might give you. So pussy toes, one thing I'll tell you when I'm going to go back one. So I always use kind of the same area in the Biota of North America program because I find it for me the most useful, but there are tons of things you can do here if you really want to dig into some of the ranges and the ways that you can use these mapping programs. But under US county level distributions, they have a way that you can list plants by the genus, and it's this little link right here. If you can see my cursor moving, list plants by genera. And pussy toes is the genus Antenaria. So you kind of have to know that. So when they give you this suggestion of Antenaria, you're going to look under the A and then remember your alphabet and find Antenaria in all of these genus or genera is what they're calling it here. So Antenaria is in this mix somewhere. There it is right there, Antenaria. And this first map that you see says, here's where the Antenaria genus occurs in the US. The bright green is the county that you'll find Antenaria in. Dark green just means that that's a state, and maybe a state with a county that you don't find Antenaria in, but because it's green, it means that it's native in that state. So if we went to Antenaria neglecta, which is field pussy toes, we can see that field pussy toes, which is right in here, this map, it occurs here. So in all of these dark green states, that's where you find field pussy toes. And in the bright green are the counties within those states where field pussy toes occurs. Now you'll also see some yellows, like in Arkansas, and that yellow means it's rare to find field pussy toes in Arkansas in those counties. Even though it does occur there, In those counties, that's where you find it. It's rare to find it. If I go and find Parlinii, which is the one that we saw, here is where you find Antenaria parlinii. So we don't really see Antenaria parlinii as much. Am I on the right one? Yeah. As you would see Antenaria neglecta in our area. It's more of an eastern species. And Antenaria neglecta is much more widespread. So a little bit more rare to see than the other one. So I was really excited to see Antenaria parlinii growing there because I hadn't ever seen it in this area before. So Antenaria parlinii and Antenaria neglecta are all part of that field pussy toes genus. And that was one of the species we found. And this is one of the tools we use to evaluate some of the suggestions that we get from iNaturalist on our species. So with that being said, that's the end of our little review of our program that we gave this year for this botanical survey of Staple M. And if there are any questions,